Callie, I'm on the
Good
pod.
evening and welcome to the Viva Cause podcast. My name's Graham Spence and I'm joined today by Alison Graham. Hello, Alison.
Hello, Graham. How you doing?
I'm very good. We've had a really exciting time in Scottish politics over the last 72 hours, I must say. And it is Sunday. It is a Viva Cause podcast day. So could you give us a quick roundup of what's happened in Scottish politics?
Yeah, well, it feels like the night of the long knives or the weekend of the long knives. It's been a few days of kind of resignations, people leaving, kind of key positions, and I think this is just part of the fallout from the announcement on how long ago was it? Three and a bit weeks ago of Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister. So lots of things have happened by then. In that time, kind of culminating in her husband, Peter Murrell, the CEO of the SNP, announcing his resignation yesterday following a meeting of the National Executive Committee yesterday morning. I think it was kind of announced midday. So that's the kind of latest on what's happened. But before that, Murray Foote, who was kind of famously known in independent circles as the author of The Vow, he was the editor of the Daily Record. But, latterly he's been the kind of head of comms, I think, at SNP, a very kind of key role. And, a whole bunch of stuff over membership numbers seem to have kind of culminated in his resignation when there was a push from the candidates, all three candidates in the leadership and First Minister, well, the leadership election, actually, the First Minister's supposed to be in Holyrood, but the leadership election to actually work out what was the size of the electorate, which seems like a completely normal thing to do. You have to know how many votes, what is the whole voting pool and what is the turnout and, what's your share of the vote, etc. So that's kind of where we've come to here. Also, the other kind of resignation that's pretty key was Liz Lloyd, who is Nicola Sturgeon's kind of right-hand woman through the kind of pretty much all of her high-level political career, has also, kind of proactively stepped down. Now, special advisors step down anyway when the First Minister, steps down, which will happen when the new leader is announced. But this has been kind of preempted, and that seemed to be quite a significant event as well. It seems to be a very much of a kind of changing of the guard opportunity, and that kind of leads us into, so where does that leave us with the candidates? Where are the candidates for election? Ash Regan, Kate Forbes, Hamza Yousaf, where do they now sit, and how do these events affect their campaigns?
Indeed. This is one of the things, obviously, because we're in a situation where it was a bit odd, and it is odd, and we need to make that clear to everyone who's watching or listening along to the podcast, which I'll plug here is available on YouTube to watch and is available on Spotify to listen and Apple Podcasts and all that nonsense. But the important point here is that the guidance sent out to candidates, to the SNP leadership candidates, said that where there wasn't an SNP rule, they would follow the local government election rules, which is a sensible position to take. It's fairly robust. The tyres have been kicked on that.
Yeah.
But in that, you always got the electorate. If you run a local government election, you actually get it when you register, and then secondly, you get it as the voter registration when the finalised electoral roll is compiled. So you get told that. You also, there's an emergency update on the day for people who are emergencyly added to the register. So these are people who possibly got to the polling station would have thought they were registered and weren't. So there's an emergency register update. This is all expected. The idea that it fluctuates daily and the idea that it's not perfect is a bit bonkers. Because this is handled regularly in elections. The second thing is I've been involved in deputy leader contests in the SNP. I've been involved in candidate selection in the SNP, so that's where multiple people have gone for the same seat. And we've had a situation in all those elections where the candidates are able to mail out, and that's done through the SNP mailing facility where you send out the email. And I suspect the reason that they've not been allowed to do the email is because it would have revealed the true number of the membership. The idea that the chief executive was the only one who knew is a bit tenuous, because the SNP mailer system reports how many people you can email, and that comes on to how the 78,000 figure got reported in the mail on Sunday in the first place. So to understand the methodology on that, the 78,000 was taken by looking at many many branches off the SNP and looking at many branches off like their membership, and then taking the uniform increase or decrease that those branches had, and then applying it to the general public to come out with a number. So 78,000 wasn't far off what is the actual true total, which is 72,000. So the methodology wasn't bad to get us to 78,000, but the true number is the 72,000 number. There's a lot of conspiracy online about that. However, that's fairly normal. Someone took a published number, applied a known rate of decrease that's been experienced in many branches, and then applied it to that number to get it 78,000. It was never going to be the most accurate number. In fact, the margin of error is probably bigger than the Green Party and the Scottish Labour Party. It's quite funny in the sense that 72,000 is still the largest party in Scotland, and per capita it's still probably the largest in the UK. But we've gone from that now into there are more demands being made. There was independent auditor, although that's kind of went to bed. There's a lot in there. I mean, what's the general feeling that you've seen amongst the community?
So amongst people, just kind of looking at social media and friends, and just pair of people I know from the SNP membership, I think that there has been definitely some issues reporting on people who have not got ballots, people who are saying that they're not members and they got ballots, and there's always a kind of pinch of salt just to make sure that there's not people just kind of making a situation about that. But there will always be issues in any kind of voting system. Nothing's like perfect, but you should endeavour to make sure that you close any of the loops on that, particularly when it's something like a democratic election. And I was going to say that, we're talking about the STV vote as the kind of fallback position for the local council elections. That's absolutely right. But the other thing is the candidates themselves were told, or the membership actually were told, that you had to be a member by, I think it was a minute to midnight or something on the 15th. So that seems to be a little bit random, because I think some people are phoning up when they're not getting ballots and they're being told you have to be a member for 3 months, which is a bit inconsistent with the rule. And I think, just to summarise it, if you're doing something important, you have to have clarity. And I think everything at every level needs to have clarity. What is the size of the electorate? And it's not rocket science. What's the size of the electorate? What are the clear rules? And are those rules consistently applied? And who's applying the rules? And what is their position? And is there no conflict of interest opportunity there? And I'm not saying that anybody would actually do anything wrong, but if there's an opportunity for conflict of interest, it will actually discredit the process in people's perceptions. And perception in politics, it means a lot. So it's really, really important, particularly since this leadership contest will, in all likelihood, lead to the next First Minister of Scotland. The probity, the demonstrable probity in this process is incredibly important, because the legitimacy of the election is incredibly important. So that's why I find it really bizarre when there's all these extrapolations from branches to work out roughly how many emails are going to be sent. It's like, it's a database. You literally click a button. As you say, I mean, when I was a national executive rep for Scotland and Fife, we had access at that level. I had access at a branch level as PEO to my branch to send so many emails out, and I could see how many were sent. And sometimes it was a problem system that people, weren't on it, or, and you could call HQ or email HQ and get that fixed and whatever. And we had a big problem actually when we were regional reps for the NEC, and the people that we should have had there often weren't on it. We didn't have the delegates because they hadn't been added. So it was quite a lot of admin chasing up HQ to try and get people added. So on that basis, we could see who we were entitled to email. So it's not a stretch to let the candidates be able to email out to, their prospectuses on email, and to say that, oh, well, there's a little video and, a blurb on the ballot. All attempts should be made to let all members have as much information as possible about all the candidates, so that they've got an informed decision. And I think, again, it's just going back to basics. The goal is an informed decision that is, agreed by consensus, is a legitimate decision at the end of the day. And, whether that's possible, given everything that's happened over the last few weeks, I don't know. But time will tell. But, if you don't fix these things proactively, they will hit you reactively, and that's hard to recover from. So I think effort needs to be made now.
So here's something that you may not know. So I was involved in the Dunfermline and West Fife selection contest in 2015. And that was the big one after the obviously referendum defeat and the massive spike in membership. So we were lucky. There was a lot of candidates standing a broad number of seats, and one of them was Michelle Thompson, who is now running Kate Forbes' campaign. So Michelle Thompson was one of our candidates, and she was standing, and Douglas Chapman was standing, and there were some others that were standing, but I couldn't name them all. And I remember at the time when Michelle was selected, so the contests didn't all end on the same day. Some seats only had one candidate put forward, therefore there were automatic ascensions to be the nominee and the candidate for the election. But other seats had different timelines, so there was a lot of me votes going on at the same time. And in that, it's interesting because Michelle actually won another seat while she was standing to be the candidate off Dunfermline. And when Michelle won that, we got an email from My Voice or SNP HQ, and it allowed us then, it told us we could go back in and you could, Michelle had been removed from the ballot. If she was your first choice, it would then move to your second choice and blah blah. But they allowed you to go back in on the new information being available to edit your vote.
Okay.
So
that makes sense.
You were able to go in, and the circumstances had demonstrably changed from when you had placed your initial ballot. So you were then, at that point, allowed to go back into the system using the same credentials you used the first time, which was your unique code and your whatever. And you went in and you were able to change your vote. You were allowed to update your vote or ensure that your preferences were respected. So anywhere where she was first, anywhere she was number one was removed, and your second choice was bumped up to one. It was done, but it allowed people to reappraise the vote. Now, it was never equitable across the whole piece because postal ballots would have always needed redone. But I'm sure there was some sort of, you could phone up and have your postal ballot sort of resent to you, or you could, with My Voice, you could change that. So there was a process though, and this isn't unique, and I'm sure you could probably get Michelle on the record. In fact, Michelle may not know because she was allocated to another seat. I could get people because it was so well known. I was the organiser of the branch.
Yeah, it's interesting because in this process, the nominations could be changed right up till the cut-off on the 12 o'clock, I think it was, on the Friday. So you could nominate someone, one or more candidates early, and then you could change that nomination. It was a click nominate, click unnominate kind of thing. So people could change their mind in the nomination process, which in a way is kind of less important because it was a very low bar of 100 nominations to actually pass that first bar into the second phase. But it's odd when it's a longer campaign, and I think the tendency is to people have got maybe a fixed view of who their candidate is. Then they start to maybe go to hustings or listen to debates, TV debates, or see policy develop. Because the thing I wanted to come back to is it's such a short contest. The fact that it's been spoken about a lot that there's only 3 candidates, but in such a short contest, any member could have stood for election, but the barrier to doing that is how do you get a campaign up and running and policy and meet the demands of the membership, the media, the public, the opposition, to actually put that together in such a short time with a kind of really short, a really small budget. I think it's £5,000 is the budget limit. And that is really difficult. So when you want to open the door to this, we talked about it in a previous podcast, the original constitutional process for leadership in the SNP was 77 days. The current process is 38 days. And I've yet to find anybody that can explain why the NEC had an emergency meeting to do that when Nicola Sturgeon, as First Minister, has not gone abroad. I mean, she's here. She's still doing First Minister questions. She's still in post. There's an Easter recess coming up. And that would all have still been concluded before the summer recess. But, the other thing that today...
It does feel a bit like, let's get it done right now.
There's something I want to talk about today. So today is 2 things. Today's Mother's Day. So, breakfast in bed today. But today's also the day that was supposed to be the special conference for the SNP. Because I remember thinking at the time that's an odd day to have it on Mother's Day. That's why it's kind of stuck in my head. But a lot of members have actually said to me that a lot of members are quite angry that they did a lot of preparation work within their branches for that special conference, because it was about the decision from the Supreme Court and where the SNP's position going forward on independence is, which, you know, I would suggest for the vast majority of SNP members is their raison d'etre, you know, and that's why they align with the party's constitutional raison d'etre. So they've done work, and that's not happened. I mean, what would be the reasons for Nicola not holding that meeting today, having members along there and actually introducing the candidates? Because at a lot of conferences I've been to before, you know, an actual election, the candidates are all brought up on stage. It's an opportunity to meet your candidate, see your candidate, have a coffee with your candidate, hear a bit more, get them to do some speeches. And, you know, I think there's a big democratic process being missed. And the hustings, I was doing a thing before, you know, about accessibility in public life, because, you know, I've got kind of some personal kind of experience there in kind of advocacy. And one of the things that's so frustrating for people who want to be part of the democratic process is having access to it. And the hustings, you know, someone has kind of raised with me that they couldn't get on. The accessibility issues prevented them to go to physical hustings, but they couldn't get onto the online hustings. So that closed, and you would thought there would have been thought put into that. Like at physical conference, accessibility is a big thing. There is British Sign Language, you know, person there for speeches. There is, you know, disabled area, you know, with you know, accessible seating, etc. So you would have thought that instead of rushing this, that would have given the NEC and the party headquarters time to make sure that the party members could all access, you know, their democratic choice.
Not just that, but I mean, we hit a slight issue because the hustings were in many cases in quite small venues.
Yeah.
Now, I would have personally, I mean, the hustings got a little bit boring near the end, and I think that comes down to, there was one lady who proudly stood up. She was in Edinburgh, and she proudly stood up and was like, "Well, I asked a question that nobody liked the other night, so I'm here to ask it again. So let me drag the question through the gutter again." And it just,
And she got picked.
you know, I would kind of like, sorry?
She got selected twice out of 2 audiences.
Yeah, 2 audiences, and it wasn't, she didn't even hit it. It wasn't like a subtle one. She got selected twice, and she asked the same question twice. So it got to the farcical point that we were actually asking the same question multiple times, just because we didn't like the answer any of the 3 gave. It was quite poor, to be honest. We then got into a situation where, you know, a large proportion of people who would like to have gone along had no idea they were even on, because
I've heard that a lot. Yeah.
And we had the other situation that, to be honest, the candidates got battered around Scotland on 8 hustings over the course of about a week and a half, which was ridiculous. You know, they're supposed to be coming up with policy, they're supposed to be setting out their stall, they're supposed to be meeting branch members, they're supposed to be meeting branches, and instead they probably spent 90% of the time in cars getting driven about and driving about themselves.
And ironically getting questioned on net zero strategies while they're all driving separate cars. Whereas if there'd been a longer period of time, public transport could maybe have been a good thing to say our SNP candidates are using public transport. But really, given the schedule, that was impossible. You know, it was really up and down the country.
The thing is, once you add in 4 TV debates, which could have been, you know, the SNP, it's not beyond them to have allowed the media to come in and ask questions as well in a hybrid format, where the media got, I don't know, it got 3 or 4 questions and the audience got the rest. Instead, we ended up with the BBC sitting there with the most Tory audience I've ever seen, getting to, you know, they were getting to lecture the candidates. I mean, I think the first commentator that spoke on the BBC said the big problem with NHS is the nurses are lazy. That was his contribution. So I kind of think he was at the wrong debate.
So when you go
we
to
were in that situation where
Yeah.
I think we could have had 3 large hustings in venues the size of, like, you know, maybe not the Hydro, but, you know, large venues where we really could have got some, you know, could have been a whole day event where people got to really go and meet the candidates, where the candidates could have done, you know, it could have been a blend. You could have had a candidates town hall, meaning that, you know, each of the candidates had a room where you could go speak to them, and then, you know, on a one-to-one, not on a one-to-one basis, sorry, but, you know, a small room, you can get a couple of 100 people in there and you can talk to that specific audience. And then you could have had the main debate that was also on TV. We could have made it 3 days instead of 12 days in the end. I personally felt terrible for Kate Forbes.
Oh
You
yeah,
know, it's
a
a
little one.
horrible.
Yeah.
You know, she's got a little one, and that's unfair for a
Yeah.
party that's claiming that they're, you know, I mean, Humza's standing there shouting about progressivity, and the party's the most progressive, and nonsense like
Yeah.
that. I mean, people don't
It's
judge
not
you by
sending the
what
right
you say.
message. It's not
Yeah,
sending the right message at all.
yeah,
Yeah, well,
absolutely
what I was
not.
going to say is debate night and question time. If you go into either of their audiences, very, I think the same people that run the audience stuff. It's you can send in questions beforehand, emailing questions, and you can write questions on a card on the night. So the media actually make sure that the same questions have not been asked. So they will look for the kind of hybrid format. Absolutely, it should have been for the members, but even at conference, the media are there for some not closed events. So. I think there definitely should have been a lot of lessons learned, and I still don't understand why it was so quick, why it was so fast tracked to get this contest concluded. It seems that it will leave more questions unanswered than answered because policy hasn't been really developed. It's certainly not been communicated. You're getting a lot of noise on socials about we don't understand people's policies, and yet the candidates are kind of doing their best with the reach that they've got to get messages out. But when you go to hustings
And
and
they've
they
been
ask
banned from spending
fairly,
any money to get people to do it.
yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. So, it's like kind of you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. And when you put something out and people think, oh, that's not an answer, or you put something out that feels quite, of a change, quite radical, then you kind of get your legs torn off for that. It's how's that going to work? But you don't get a chance to explain it. So that's a really weird position to be in. But also the key
The
issues
other
for the country were not really explored in the depth they were until the TV debates, because the members' debates didn't really go into a lot of that. Sorry, the members' hustings didn't really go into.
There's the issue you've got, though, is that the people who are standing to be First Minister of the country, the people who are standing for this, will be surrounded by smart people, the civil service and the resources that they have available to them.
Mhm.
The problem you've got is the media is currently operating at full tilt with the full resource that it has to take on Prime Ministers and First Ministers normally. However, the media is currently taking on candidates that have voluntary teams. It's not a level playing field. Beth Rigby, and the one that we're supporting, Ash Regan, she tried to chop her at the legs and say, but you've not thought about the Independent Debt Management Office that, is a requirement for currency. And the odd thing is, we then find
It's
out,
not.
we find out about an hour later after the debate concludes that actually it's not a key function of,
Yeah.
you don't require one, most countries don't have one, it is good practice to have one, a lot of countries just have the central bank do it. So Ash Regan wasn't wrong, but
No.
she could
But
have
Beth
explored
Briggs
that.
is basing her question on the UK, and this is what happens in Scotland a lot. We are comparing,
Exactly.
very much pushed into comparing Scotland as an independent country to the UK, rather than Scotland as an independent country to what is possible and what is demonstrated in other areas across the world that may align
I also
better.
don't think if you got the Governor of the Bank of England up to come and name the 38 functions of the central bank, he could do so.
No, in a Sky interview, probably not. But I think it really boils down to what are we measuring in this contest? What does success actually look like for the candidates? Because for long we've challenged that Scotland has to be better than personality politics. It's something that's seeped into the UK from the States, the kind of presidential, it's very much on personality. So they build them up to knock them down kind of thing. So if we want to develop an independent country, Humza Yousaf actually said it, which I thought was quite funny, kind of earlier on in the campaign, which was the most bizarre thing I've ever heard from somebody standing to replace a leader, is to say, well, Nicola Sturgeon is basically the best leader, that's ever graced us with her presence, and I could never be as good as her, which is weird. But it also leads us to the question that I think he has actually hit on a key point, that if you think Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon, both big dominant personalities who have done different things for different people, I would suggest, if they couldn't do it, it actually proves that, no individual can do it. And I think that is the logical conclusion that really was there from the outset, that you're setting people up to fail. No individual can deliver Scottish independence. It has to be a team. And I think that's why we've fallen down on the approach of Ash Regan, of the open the doors approach, which we've said for a long, long time. That there's a huge amount of talent and power in Scotland, but the people have been convinced out of their own power. And I think once you actually harness that, and you look back retrospectively at 2014, they never feared the politicians or the sanitised political campaign. They feared the grassroots because they didn't know what to do with it. They didn't control it. And if you look at movements across the world, that's what happens. That's where change happens. It happens from the ground up.
You've got Tim Rideout today. He's currently taking on the UK's journalists over currency and over, issues of state, and he's winning.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think people do need that voice. And I think, just go back to the SNP election. There's two parts to it. There's the leading the country from an AFM, but there's also leading the party and shaping the party and what the party is going to look like in the future, and really how prepared it will be for that. To lead the political arm of the independence movement. When I say independence movement, the independence conclusion, because we have to be at the current start point of about 50%. If now is not the time, when is? Because, the people, it's normalised with people, whether you're for it or against it. That's the time to have the conversation, to convince. And to be frank, if you can't convince people, should we actually be an independent country, then you failed in your argument, because Scotland has everything it needs to be successful in a thriving country. But we really do need to kind of get that look at what the independence party of government needs to do. And I think it's the same thing as the independence movement. You have to open the doors. You have to bring the talent in. The power of the SNP is its membership. And I think what the events of the last few days have shown, and it's been quite consistent now across the candidates, some of them leading the charge on this. Ash Regan had her action plan out the door very early, and identified all the buttons that everybody's now talking about accountability and transparency and modernity and everything. So, and plans to how we train people up and we support them, and membership, how they get a voice at every level. If you don't do that, you are working with the door shut on your actual engine of power. And that is where I think the biggest change can happen. And the result of this election, I think, will determine whether it is more of the same, whether people say that they're not going to be a continuity candidate. I think people have forgotten how to open the door and how to hold power without control. And I think that the control can choke the power you've actually got. And you need to trust the membership and trust the people in the way that you expect them to trust you.
Yeah. So we on that.
It ends my Sunday sermon.
Let's take a quick pivot. So obviously, we're going to come on to the people who've left, but we're going to. The rumor mill and the conspiracy theory mill is buzzing. It's never been so alive, and this is taking form, and this is something that we've kind of teased among some of the Viva Cost supporters. So we're going to cover it now. We originally weren't until the campaign ended, but we will cover it now. Yeah. There is a Smitty on the Wings Over Scotland blog, who is a commentator that drops, bombshells, and he's been attributed a high degree of accuracy, which we've personally enjoyed, because one of the things that we've been doing is noting down what the actual claims are, not the periphery, not the there's going to be big things happening, which is true in any leadership election. Big things are always happening. There's always something on that round the corner. So, in the generis, Smitty is right, because something exciting does happen every day or so. So, calling that there's going to be big things happening is not a particularly hard or high hurdle. In a period of change, it's actually, if things weren't happening quickly, it would be unusual. Yeah. So we've got to the situation where, Smitty's now telling us that big things are happening. So the specific claims that have been made are usually nonsense. In fact, we're not going to repeat them because some of them are actually possibly libelous.
Yeah, absolutely.
we're not going to repeat the specific claims. However, you will notice that there are certain ones. Now, there's ones that we're going to talk about. There's ones in particular where we talk about. There was one that spoke about how Hamza had the information from HQ, and so certain he was of this that they had booked a champagne bar in Edinburgh to have drinks and celebrate. Now, for anybody who's actually involved in a campaign, anybody who's actually in there, and I had spoke to Hamza's people, his team that day, and this was the champagne reception where everybody was going to be celebrating, and you know all these bigwigs were coming to celebrate this. Was on the day of the Inverness hustings, that I think the second Inverness hustings, I should say, that every candidate was a little bit, or I should say every candidate team. I think the candidates are probably more into it than everybody else, but the teams were all a bit like, oh really?
Logistics, yeah.
Yeah, logistically, for volunteers, getting a bunch of them up to Inverness, it's a good 2.5, 3 hour drive for some of us. Yeah. It's, 2 hours up there. It was getting held at 7 till 9, so then add a 3 hour drive down, the A9 that everybody's, accepted as one of the worst roads in Scotland at this moment in time. Yeah. And then add in a 3 hour travel home, and you're talking midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning. The teams were all lethargic. So we had discussed this. We had discussed this. We knew where Hamza's team and the Ash Regan team and where the Kate Forbes team were going to be and how they were getting there. So this champagne thing came out of nowhere. And in fact, 3 days prior to this, everybody already knew where the candidates were going to be. It just so happened that because the people off the Central Belt who were involved in this had no idea there was actually a hustings on at the north of Scotland, and that, the rumour was just mental. It was just. It
actually shows their lack of knowledge rather than their knowledge, to be honest, and that's what's really interesting. I was going to say the campaign teams were also cognisant of the fact there had been no hustings in some areas of the country, so we were going back up to Inverness again, having not been down to like Argyll and areas like that, and we'd been to Dumfries, but there's a huge swathe of Scotland that the membership didn't get to see. So yeah, I think it shows a lack of knowledge. It's a wee bit like Isa from Still Game of the politics world. I'm surprised Shawnee Boy's not done one yet. Yeah,
but what happened the next day? So Smitty then, of course, not to be wrong, then updates it and said that to not look bad, they've went up to Inverness. They didn't not look bad.
I wasn't wrong, but they changed their mind because that's what they were going to do. But then they say, "Oh yeah, I know." It's just it's almost
Hamza's really run down. Hamza was clearly. I mean, you're meeting thousands of people. You're in rooms of hundreds of people. You're doing your best to meet as many people as possible in as many meetings as possible. It's still cold outside, so everybody's inside. And you're ending up, the candidates are all getting the cold. They are all getting the flu. They are all getting COVID. Like this is just happening, and it has to that's going to happen. It's a real thing. In presidential campaigns, they've always, before COVID was even a thing, they used to run around with hand sanitizer, and and it was because they knew that the high probability you're going to meet somebody who's not very well. And I think we said at one of the debates, maybe it was like the Channel 4, maybe it was just after the Channel 4 or something. We said Hamza looked a little bit ill. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with Hamza. I'm just saying that he looked as though he had a cold or something.
Yeah, I had the cold that week as well. So
I mean, perfectly reasonable. So I mean, then they were like, and then because obviously they turned up at a hustings that was pre-arranged and pre-agreed, they then the next day blogged about, well, we've been right all along. And I was a bit like, you only got told you were wrong, so you quickly pivoted to use the actual facts and then claimed something that, by the way, was in the Courier. Like, you're claiming inside knowledge of that. The other thing we done, and this is the grand Viva Cos release, is that we had a hunch of how they're getting content. We had a hunch on how they were working out what to say and put in there. So we dropped 1 or 2 items that may or may not be true into a conversation with the person who we believe is probably feeding them information. And absolute true to form, Alison, was it published the next day?
It was, Graham. It was.
And was it a shock to you?
No, not at all, to be honest.
So I mean,
yeah.
so we know we've kind of worked out where some of this information's coming from. We've worked out there isn't only one source. There's multiple sources obviously here, and we're fairly convinced this person's taking Chinese whispers and absolute nonsense, passing it up
And
and down the chain,
knitting them into a
aligning it
story.
with some things that are true to sort of
Yeah.
add credibility. But the odd thing is, most people don't make proclamations. So the interesting thing is, if I said to you, one thing is going to happen tomorrow, it didn't happen, you would say he's not credible because it didn't happen. If I said 50 things are going to happen tomorrow and 25 of them
The
are,
laws of probability kick in.
yes. And
Particularly,
then
they're quite
if I say
binary.
a couple of things, if I say a couple of things that are known fact and I've dropped them in there with the other 50, the interesting thing is the next day you see me as more credible than I got one thing wrong with my
Yeah.
other example. So it's an odd psychological trick.
There's another aspect to it as well. I remember speaking to somebody who's a pollster about this before, about how polls are illustrative, but they're also they also drive behaviour as well as reflect, public opinion. Because if people think, and it was actually the Better Together pollster that I spoke to at one of the SNP conferences years ago, and he agreed, and he said that the Better Together team, when the poll came out for 52%, 2 weeks before the independence vote, it was a call to action. People they were Better Together supporters, but they'd never posted a leaflet, they'd never done anything. They were inundated with people turning up because they panicked. And I think this is one of the things here. If you tell people and it makes people feel as if something is about to happen, suddenly they absorb that as the true position. But a big danger, as much as these things can be kind of a bit of fun sometimes, there's also a fine balance that truth is so important in politics just now and so lacking. And I think people's faith in politicians and faith in the political system, to come back to where we started with the kind of faith in the whole contest, it's incumbent on everybody to actually try and walk, a kind of true line here, because otherwise we end up disenfranchising the electorate. And at the end of the day, political parties are like people on a stage, with a production. If the audience don't show up, you're talking to yourself. So we have to keep the people engaged, and we can only do that by actually doing it in a credible way. Because the other thing is, people stop sharing information as well. If people think, there's, we've had this so many times, different things like leaking stuff and what have you, and you get to the stage you think, really. So yeah, I think there's a real danger that communication is the victim and faith in politics is actually the conclusion.
Quick fire round, because I know we're now on a time schedule and that you need to go and see your mother on Mother's Day.
I do. Yes.
I've already done it this morning, so I'm ahead of you.
Big time.
Quick fire round. So obviously Liz Lloyd was serving at the pleasure of the First Minister anyway, so Liz Lloyd was always going to be departing. So her departure being announced seems a really bizarre thing for her to do, actually, because, well, what you wouldn't have been there anyway.
Yes.
No?
I agree. I think it would have been very highly, highly unlikely if Liz Lloyd was still in her position with the new First Minister.
Okay, moving on. We had Murray Foote, and he left because effectively the journalistic integrity of the SNP and the media is such that he genuinely believed he was telling the truth when there was 100,000 members still in the party that nobody else believed, but the head of comms, which, it probably shows a disparity between the people.
Yeah.
There's a disparity between obviously the people who are working in the party at a high level and the actual truth that's on the ground. And that's odd. I would have thought that would have been, better known.
But this is where trust comes back. If you're in a situation that you trust implicitly because, you're in the party and everybody assumes that the people who are above you in the structure are all, telling the truth and being honourable, whatever, that is something not to be taken for granted. If you're in a position of authority and power, that's a huge responsibility. Because if, like this happened with the SNP, that it's turned out that Murray Foote was basically, humiliated, from a journalistic point of view. And I think, to be honest, the journalistic wagons have rallied round him. So I don't think his credibility will be damaged. But, the fact that he was put in that position was really extraordinary. Because if you can't, that's your bread and butter. If you're a serious journalist who, not like a, gossip, merchant kind of thing as we were talking about earlier, some of the kind of commentary, then, that's your professional credibility. Having been in a similar position, before, which, one of the reasons, I left the SNP was, that people's professional and personal credibility is important to them, and if that gets damaged, that's a really, really big line to cross with people, and that's where you really start getting in trouble. I think the SNP have got a big task ahead to rebuild that. Mm-hmm.
And then finally, we've got Peter Murrell. And it's bizarre that Peter Murrell has presided over the SNP. He says he was leaving anyway, which I put some faith in that he was probably leaving. I think that he probably knew he served under Salmond and Sturgeon. There was probably going to need to be a fresh breath there. I don't think he was possibly going the day after like he intimated, but no. I think he was going anyway. And I think that the interesting thing, he jumped out and he says, look, I'm done here. And he's resigned because it was his fault over the membership numbers, which of course he had full control over and knew what he was doing. But more bizarrely, Hamza Yousaf was like, Peter Murrell's the strength behind the SNP, great strategist, all this sort of thing. Is he a great strategist? Here's the fundamental question though, and this is something that's came up in the Reagan campaign. Would you accept Carrie counting the votes of Boris's successor? So the question comes in, was it not a problem 8 years ago when the chief executive was married to the party leader and first minister? Did that not seem odd at the time? Like, there are lots of jobs in SNP HQ. I say lots. There's 20 or so. Could he not be a strategist but not in charge? Like, the problem's not that he worked in HQ. That is not the problem. The problem is that he was the head, the chief, the top of HQ. Yeah.
So I think one of the things that is really kind of key here is I'm not even sure it was the right thing to do to have him as CEO when Nicola Sturgeon was a deputy first minister, because that is a very senior position, as deputy leader and deputy first minister as well. So I mean, he's been in this position knowingly for so long that it's become the abnormal has been normalised. Because in a corporate level, that would be really unusual. I mean, really unusual, and there would be a huge amount of layers of scrutiny built in to prove there was no conflict of interest in everything you did. And there would be, like, having been on the NEC, they really don't know what conflict of interest means, in my humble opinion, having seen some of the votes. So there's a huge thing there that to outsiders looking in, it looks bizarre, but inside the bubble, it's completely normal. And this is why nobody, even somebody who is a journalist like Murray Foote, wouldn't have questioned the information he got from Peter Murrell, because he got it from Peter Murrell. And this is the thing that's a real crack, and what else? And the fact that, the First Minister and Peter Murrell, are husband and wife, then, you're talking about his plan to leave. I mean, he must have been part of her decision-making process in leaving. So if anybody got a heads up, and there's rumours that Hamza got a heads up, and I know that he cancelled his legal case, which, remember we talked about this before, I said when that happened, that made me think something's happening, because you had written the blog about a hold the ship a wee while just before that. And that was the first indication I thought, oh, something's happening. But the reason it threw me was I'd never considered Hamza to be the candidate, the kind of continuous candidate. Considered a number of people, but not him. So I thought, that's odd that he's doing that. Maybe he's going to be campaign manager or backer or whatever. So that was the thing. But Nicola and Peter must have made that decision together. So they must have had a joint plan of when they would leave. So he must have been prepared to do that. And I again, do I think he would still have been there? It's very difficult, because the head of the First Minister, or the head of the party, the leader of the party, is also the head of the NEC. So the deputy leader is currently Keith Brown, and Nicola Sturgeon are both on the NEC. They both sit as roles on the governing body of the party. And Peter Murrell, as CEO, was the staff of the party, along with a number of other people, as you've mentioned, from HQ. So the role of the NEC is to direct the staff. So that in itself is really strange. So if there's something that, can't obviously talk too much about it, but, if in the position I was in, let's just say, that was a really awkward position, because a very popular in the party First Minister was married to the boss, like the kind of like the HQ boss. So yeah, I think you're trying to like pivot to a positive. Every change is a bit scary for some people, and it's a great opportunity for other people. But I think if you embrace changes happening anyway, you start to look beyond. You start looking backwards and you start looking forwards and saying, okay, this is the opportunity to take an honest look at an organisation and say what works and what needs work. What are we not doing and what problems does that cause us? And there is a concept in organisations of a risk register, and I would have said having the First Minister and the CEO as husband and wife is high in the risk register, because if one of them leaves, the other one's likely to. So even that in itself, if you've got a CEO that's, as Humza said, is the best thing since sliced bread, success, you want him in your team, the fact that his wife is standing down, they might decide they're moving abroad. So that's high in the risk register.
One of the nice things that could come out of this is I genuinely believe we're going to have a stronger SNP. I do think there will be a stronger SNP that falls out the back of this, because every time there's turmoil, every time there's something like this, right now the SNP's lipstick on a donkey. And the interesting thing is they still have the resources, financial, and they have the resources in party membership that they can actually do a really good job. They're still the biggest in Scotland and still the biggest by capita in the UK. So they can turn this around. There's no doubt about that. It just requires
all
the right
talent. Yeah, I agree. It's all in their gift and approach. And I think if they can approach this in the right way and really leave the egos at the door, leave the personality politics at the door, and get back to what the SNP was founded on. And it was on, values, and it was on policy, and it was on a more ambitious vision for Scotland, and one that you can actually implement. And I think where the SNP have fallen down domestically is they come up with a lot of policy stuff that looks great on an A4 piece of paper or on the side of a bus. But when you actually look at implementation, it falls flat. And I think, that this is always a danger, the double-edged sword of power. When you're in power for a long time, it kind of makes you lazy. And, if you don't have to argue your case to the opposition because you've got the votes to get it through, and you kind of don't allow critical friends within your own party, and you don't have enough debate, and conference for everybody for 2 years because of the lockdown, has stifled that the energy in a face-to-face debate. And I think hopefully this is another new broom thing, that the membership, the doors will be open to the membership. People will get back in the room. People will agree. To build consensus, and they will disagree agreeably. They will actually have robust debate, but it will not be about sound bites. It will be about substantive policy and substantive change.
Well, I think that's where we'll leave it for today. It's a 45-minute episode, one of our shortest. Our next episode we are intending and bringing to you, and it'll have a bit more commentary. We're going to invite some guests on and hopefully have some feedback on the end of the election, because believe it or not, next Sunday night I'm not here, so we're not recording next Sunday night, but we'll be recording after that, probably midweek, and the election will have closed. So I've been Graham, Alison's been Alison. Thank you for watching and listening, and we will see you on the next episode. Goodbye.
Take care. Bye.